Alrighty, so got the landing gear on the Nieuport, and I have to paint the edges of the paper, and I'm trying to mix it something that looks kind of like a blue that will match the struts. I'm just using plain old white and plain old blue, and just sort of getting something that's close. It doesn't have to be exact. I mean, the closer it is, the better, but it's not going to kill you if it's not absolutely perfect. Like initially when I put this on, I think it's too dark, so I lighten it up a little later. It's nothing that's going to really draw the eye. It's just going to make it better than a white line. The other thing to remember is if you do paint a color and it looks really garish, it doesn't look like it's supposed to, you could just step back and paint the whole strut, all the struts that color. It wouldn't be a bad thing. Then they would all be exactly the same. But this is just something that you need to do to make it look a little nicer, just in general. Here I think I need more white, so I'm just adding a little more white to it to dull it, lighten it up a tiny bit. And mixing paint and stuff is kind of fun to do. If you've never done it, you should try. Try on something spare model or something, but play around with colors and try to get them as close as you can. Usually I can color edges with markers sometimes, with some like watercolor markers. Other times I use my acrylic paint. Now see there I went over and I smooshed it way over and it looked really bad, so I just thought, okay, forget it. I'll just paint the whole spreader bar. And that's on the underside anyway, no one's going to see it. But all of these little bits and pieces, little care that you take to fix up these edges, it is going to make a world of difference ultimately with your model. It'll just make it look that much better. And the fun part with these paper models is for people to look at it and go, number one, not realize it's paper. And then number two, when they do realize it's paper, then they're kind of gobsmacked. So not with this one. This one's a perfect model for a paper model. If you've never built a paper model before and you wanted to have a hankering to build a World War I era airplane, this one, even the rigging is very simple. This would be a great one to start with because the fit is good and it's a pleasant looking airplane and there's nothing super complicated about it. Alignments are pretty good. So it wouldn't be a bad one to try if you were so inclined and you really wanted to try a paper model. Most of Merrick's stuff is pretty solid. I haven't had any huge problems with them. Once in the blue moon, something's weird, but generally speaking, they seem to be pretty good. Oh, and then I happened to see there were a couple of white spots on some of my other blue trailing edges I wanted to fix. And so I'm just going around the model, making sure it's pretty good. Since I got the paint out, may as well fix them. And that way they're all done. And it does look much better. Again, just by eye, when you just take a peek at it and you're going to view it like a normal person, it looks really nice. And it's nice not to have those white edges, so that's great. Now what I tried to do, kind of successfully, kind of not, I used 0.5 millimeter fuse wire. And I use this for bungees around the base of the spreader bar where the wheels are going to go, the wheels and tires. I thought about just using like thread and wrap it around or something else, but I thought I'm going to try this and see how it looks. As it ends up, I only made one wrap, and so it's just sort of a suggestion. There should be multiple wraps, and I probably next time would just use some kind of thread. Would probably be better, but I did it this way this time. Put on a little bit of super glue, hit the end of the fuse wire with some zip kicker, and then started the whole process. And all you do is, once it's glued on and dried, you just sort of spin it around. And I cut this really long, and I kind of shorten it, and it ended up when I shortened it too much because that was kind of a mistake. I should have left it long. But as I started to sort of wind this around and thread it through, it became kind of a pain to use. Because I'm starting to realize, hey, wait a second, it's going to be a little big here. I mean, you can bend it easily, so it's not a problem to bend it over. But I thought, I don't need it that long. But as I said, I cut it off here, and I really shouldn't have. I should have left it long, because then I had to splice things together later, which was really dumb and makes it not look so good. Most of this is going to be hidden by the wheels, and you're not going to sit there underneath the model and look for these, but I'll know they're there. And it adds a little piece of detail that isn't in the model that that should be, because that's the other thing about these World War I era airplanes. They are, everything's out for you to see them. The engines are out, the cockpits are open, the seat belts are there, etc., etc. So, um, it's good to do some of these and make them look good. So then I roll it around the other side of the axle and bring it over, and the idea is it'll wrap around, and it should wrap around, like I said, several times when you look at pictures. Mine's just one loop, it goes all the way around. And as I said, this one I'm short. I needed it to go up a little bit more, but I added a little piece and kind of fudged it together, and it's okay. I did the other side better. But the point is that wire is easy to work with because it's very bendable, very flexible, and you can squish it and things. It glues fine, and you end up with something that looks like a piece of bungee cord. And 1/2 millimeter is pretty close, I think. Again, maybe next time just use plain old, use some quilting thread or something my wife has. Or you buy a spool of thick yarn, some kind of yarn or thread. It'll last you your lifetime and your great-grandchildren's lifetime, because you don't use a lot of it at each point. But here I'm just making sure they're flattened and they look good. And now I am starting the other side and trying to get it to start to go around. And I'm going to do the same thing. Let it dry for a couple minutes, and then I cut this off, but this time I let it longer. And that worked much better. Experience, hindsight is 90/80, whatever they say. So I'm not going to show you that in normal speed because you'll fall asleep, but I'm just wrapping it around and bringing it so that it makes those loops, and then a little bit of glue and dry it. You don't even have to glue it, I suppose. Again, they're not going anywhere on it, but there they are, and you can't see them that well, and no one will be able to see them that well even in real life, but it's nice to have them on there because the underside, you can see that there's bungees, so I'm pretty pleased with it. It looks good. And here I'm adjusting them a little bit. That's what's nice about about that fuse wire. You can really kind of manhandle it and push it together and put it in places and put it up against things so it looks like it's tight. Looks like it's elastic around there. So that would be a good thing to do, just to clean it up. Elastic. That's what I should do. Go to Joann Fabrics and get some elastic stuff. I bet you that would work great. It'd be thicker and rounder than like Easy Line, and it might even look like a real small shoestring. And wrap it around, and it's an actual bungee. Maybe I'll try that next time. I'll go look and see. But I'm just squeezing this shut, making sure it's good. And when you're pleased with it, which I think I am at this point, it doesn't look bad. So the landing gear is almost finished. Just needs to be rigged. The front bay needs to be rigged. So that's, pretty nice. Easier to do than the MiG landing gear, in my opinion. Now here's just showing you how I do this. I've done it before, but I measure the size that the elastic needs to be, and then I pull out my Easy Line, use my dividers, and cut them to length. And in this case, cut 2 of them. This is a very easy rigging session. And by the way, I don't put turnbuckles on these things usually because life's too short. And I look at pictures of the real airplanes, and a lot of times, unless they're up close, you barely know there's a turnbuckle there. However, I've seen them done really well with turnbuckles that are the correct scale, and they look really neat. So some things, maybe the next one I make, I'll show you how I do turnbuckles. They're not hard to make your own. I just like to get things rigged, and this is a nice, quick way to do it. And I don't think it looks bad. So I put a little bit of glue on the end of the Easy Line, just have a puddle of super glue over on the side, out of earshot, out of eyesight, I guess. And putting them in their locations, which are right down the base of where the spreader bar is and the struts attach. Excuse me. And then give them a little shot of accelerator just to get them ready. And now these are just going to get pulled up and glued underneath where they're supposed to go. I put it on my finger, a piece of the thread on my finger, so that I can put a little piece of, or so I can douse it with some accelerator, excuse me, don't want to light it on fire. And then I put a piece of super glue on that edge where it's going to go up in the corner, and I just grab the piece and put it up there. And assuming everything's fresh and good, it works really well. If your glue isn't fresh, sometimes there's a problem. But here I am putting some more glue up on that end. I've already added some accelerator to that piece of elastic, and I just bring it up, and it dries pretty instantaneously. You gotta hold it a few seconds. And again, if your glue is sitting around that's old, sometimes you run into trouble, and it won't glue. But ultimately, everything works out, and now you've got this thing all rigged, and it's just the one bay based on the pictures I've seen of the real airplane. So it's very simple. And that's the way all of it was rigged. I didn't show how I rigged everything else, but that's exactly how everything else was rigged. Oh, and looking at this picture, I gotta get the white lines off of my V struts. I gotta mix some tan or something and put those in there because those look silly. So I'll do that too. Anyway, there's the landing gear, finally done. Waiting for tires. Looks pretty good. I like it. It's so different than making the MiG. It's interesting. 40, 50 years apart, and it's cool. Speaking of MiGs, I put the little piece on the nose wheel there to finish that off. And then I also put on that big pitot tube that sticks out. That's a piece of pulled sprue that I ran a silver Sharpie over. And the MiG is done. The MiG is officially finished. So when we do more Migport movies, it's not going to be able to MiG until the very end where we show them together. But the MiG's done, except for my glue globs and all my issues with the wings and the tails fitting and the straight and stuff. I still think it's a cool airplane. I do want to get a better model of it, though, and do a better job. So now I decided next thing to do was start the engines, or the engine, and all those pieces are there, and I've cut some stuff out. But then I forgot to show you, I did the wheels off camera. I was busy doing some other stuff. But they're just balsa sandwiched together, two 1/16 balsas, put them in the Dremel, got them the right shape, and then put the end pieces on. Very simple. Didn't show anything. And then I just glued them on at the correct angles and things with some of that thick super glue. So now it's got wheels and tires. So that is the start of the crankcase. So that is a long strip, and it has a binding tab in it. And then there's you can see each point where I'm trying to show you, it's bent and it's flat. So it goes around as a circle, but it's angular. And then we'll just start by putting a little bit of glue on the tab. And then you grab your tweezers and you line up the pieces and squeeze them together. You just take your time. And again, if things are test fitted 100 times, they should fit pretty good. And you get this up there, you make sure it's lined up, and then you let the glue tag a little bit, and then you grab and hold with your tweezers. And that Alien's glue dries pretty dang fast, and it works pretty well. So that's the beginning of the crankcase. All the cylinders will go on there where there's those little circles. So there it is. Those other pieces down there, by the way, are going to be the cylinders. Now I start cutting out the front and the back that need to go in there. And those are those two pieces that are horizontal right next to each other. And I just cut these out. I should have used a straight edge maybe, but I didn't bother. I just cut these out, slowly pull them apart, front and back. And you just got to make sure which one's the front and which one's the back. It turns out that one I'm working on now is the front, and I'll try to show you why in a second here. This one with the big wide, the white in the center, and just a little bit of edging that's gray, that has to be, because that piece, the front piece here is going to go on right up in the front there. But see, that's this piece here with the thicker gray. This piece I'm circling is going to be rolled into a tube, and that fits on the back. So that piece is the back part of the shaft, the crankcase. And the crankcase has these little holes, little white circles. That's where push rods go, so that's the forward-facing part of the crankcase. So what I did was, like I do with formers on airplanes, I cut the piece and I slid it inside, and then it matches up beautifully flat, and then I glued from the back, making sure that it was nice and solid. Um, and then I tried to do the same thing with the other side, and I realized I needed to cut a hole out of this in order to do that trick of putting the former in and then pushing it down. And by the way, it doesn't say on the plans that any of this has to be backed with any kind of cardboard, so these are all just the paper that I printed it on, which is fairly heavyweight stock, but I'm not using any extra pieces of wood on this. So here I'm going in and locking it in place from the back side with some glue, which will be more than sufficient to hold it in place. That'll work great. And so here I'm cutting out just a ragged hole in the center of this. It's going to be covered by the plate that goes over it. But that's so when I put the other side on, I can push it from the opposite side. If there's no hole there, you can't push it out. And I suppose you could be really careful and add the piece exactly like it's supposed to go, and it would fit beautifully if I were Polish or Russian or German or anybody else. But for me, I have a problem with that. So what I did was I stuck this thing in and pushed it down a little bit so that it's sort of inside the piece that it's supposed to be on. And then I turn it over. You see it's inside. It's a little bit lower than it's supposed to be. But if I turn it over, and then I can do this trick of pressing from that side, then you push the piece of paper up against the table, the mat, and then it matches up perfectly, and you're good. And I've already put glue in there, by the way. So there it is. So there's the basic part of the crankcase done. And now we're going to put the front and the back part on. So this part is part of the front. It's a little base piece that goes in the front. That gray piece that's underneath there with the slot cut out of it, that's going to be the piece that goes in the front proper, that piece right there. I'm going to cut that out. And just basically that's going to be turned into a really delicate cone, essentially. Not a real pointy thing, but just something that just comes out a little ways. I just cut that thing out very carefully. And if you do it slowly around the outside edge, you get a really nice circle. And cut it in little pieces. Don't try to necessarily cut it as one fell swoop. I have problems when I do that. So that's going to be the backing to that piece. I take my trusty brush handle and I roll this so that it forms kind of a very shallow cone. And then I put some glue on it, on the seam. And then I squeeze it shut with a little bit with my thick my thick tweezers, my thicker ones, those guys with the big round tips. Neil's right. Invest in some good tweezers. They're absolutely a necessity. Anyway, there you go. And then that is going to go on that white circular piece to act as a backing, just like that. So I just put some glue on there and add that in place. And then that whole thing goes on the top of the crankcase. So I'm just adding the glue around the edge and sticking it to my fingers. And then you just put this thing on there. And it doesn't matter if the letter is inside or outside because it's going to be covered. It's just going to be a place to glue. So there's that. Looking at you, that's the front part. That's where the shaft would go for the propeller, for example, in that little white circle. I'm just making sure it's good. And then I make sure which side I'm adding this to. And again, now you can see what I mean by you got that big white circle to fill. That means that's the front because that is the exact diameter of this little shallow cone piece we just made. That piece right there. So you just put this on, cover up the big white hole, the big white circle, and here I'm matching up the seam lines on everything. I want to try to make the seam lines all in the same place. So I'm making sure that I'm trying to make sure that where is the seam line? Where did I put that crankcase together? And I did such a good job I could barely tell. I finally did figure out where it was. But when you start adding these things together, it's good to keep the seams lined up because then you can, for instance, turn the motor and hide the seam, or you can put things at the bottom, whatever you want. So Get that together, and I'll be able to touch up that line a little bit with some paint and some light gray, and we'll be able to hide some of that. That I made off screen. That's just a little cylinder with a couple end pieces. That's part of the propeller shaft. And another piece goes on the tip of that, by the way, which I didn't make yet, but that's going to be where the prop's going to actually plug into once it's ready. But there is the front part of the thing done. Now I'm going to make this back piece, which is that little extension that'll be attaching to the firewall. And you just, carefully cut this thing out. Again, this is absolutely, you need to use your straight edge for that. And there I'm cutting out the front and the back of that. They don't matter what side is which, because all they're doing is making a cylinder and capping it off. So there I'm using another smaller paintbrush to roll the thing into a circle. And there's no tabs on this. I would usually use tabs, but they didn't come with any, so I thought, okay, I won't use them. Because you can end and butt joint things if you're good. I'm not that good, so it worked, but it could be better. Um, but anyway, put a little tiny bit of glue on there, roll the piece up to it, and make sure that you got it end butted up together, the ends butted up together, and then hold it in place. And you can kind of hold it between your fingers and even push down on it. See, I'm pushing down with my thumb, and that's giving it a little bit of pressure. It's kind of making it go oblong, but it's making those two pieces of paper hit each other end on. Now, to hold it in place even more, I'm putting my glue around the outside edge, which is where one of the two circles is going to go. And of course, when those go on, those will help give it, shape, and those will help it hold as well. Um, once that's on there, so I drop that on there. And these things, I don't know if they're supposed to go inside or right on the outside. I don't know. I suppose if you measured everything precisely, you'd be able to tell. I've never bothered to worry. Um, anyway, do the same thing with the other side, and you go ahead and put the other piece on there, the other round piece, and now you've got that completely finished and ready. And that again is just the extension that's going to be glued, or if I make it spin, it's going to be attached to the actual firewall on the model. But that piece goes back there on the back side of the crankcase, and then the crankcase will be done. And again, I'm making sure that the tiny little, I already have it oriented, but the tiny little white dots are going to be where the push rods go, so those are going to be in the front. So put some glue on here, roll it around, make sure it's good, and then just pop this little guy on. Front, back, doesn't make any difference. I'm going to touch up all the edging with some paint once the motor's actually finished. I'm not bothering painting too many edges right as I assemble. But there it is. And then those big white spots are going to be where all the cylinders go. So there it is. Looks pretty cool. You can see it fits right there, and it's a one-to-one drawing, and that's what it's going to look like. Slick. So now we get to do all the little cylinders and make them and start putting them on the crankcase. That little piece there that I'm pointing to is a piece that I haven't done yet, but that's just going to be a little thing, or a little rolled piece with end plates that goes on the very tip, and that's going to feed directly into the propeller. So that's going to happen, but I didn't bother making it right now. But sweet, that is the crankcase. It's strong. It looks good, I think, and with a little touch-up paint, you can barely tell there any seams at all. So it's going to look nice. So now we start making all those cylinders. So the first thing you do is you cut all the cylinders, and they've all got little tabs on them, which I like. These tabs, however, probably in retrospect should be thinner paper. I used just the same paper I cut the cylinders with, and they're so stiff that it's hard to make them make a little circle, make a curve. And you're putting the cylinder on like that where the dotted line is, and then just push it down and glue it. So now when you do roll these guys around to make the cylinders, sometimes that gives actually like a flat edge to the cylinder. And so next time I would make them out of just plain old typing paper, because they're just to help. Those are end plates and those are the top plates. And that gives you an idea what the diameter is going to be. So what I did with these was I took this little quilling tool. If you don't have one, get one. They're handy. And you slide it on opposite the tab side, and you just roll it around. And that breaks the fibers and rolls it up. You pull that out very easily, and you roll this between your fingers. And now all this is doing is getting the paper to suggest it wants to lie around in a tube. Then I pull it apart a little bit because now you got it so tight that it's actually, the diameter is too small. But that's better than having it not small enough because you want to be able to add glue and then have it sort of spring into place. So pull it back, and once you test it and see that you're going to be able to put the cylinder around and match it, then I add a little bit of glue to the tab itself. Don't need much because too much it'll slide around and be hard to put together. And I usually grab some tweezers and roll it in place, and I kind of match things up. You want to match it up so that it's butting right up against the other side like that. And once you got it, then you kind of try to squeeze it. And invariably with these, especially this time, I don't know why, it looked really good when I squeezed it, but then when I pulled my tweezers away, there's a white line, so it's not up to where it's supposed to be. See that white line? That's supposed to be closer. And all I can think of is as I squeeze it, I have too much glue, and they slide as I put pressure on them. It's going to work. And what I'm pointing out there is on each cylinder there's a little discolored part. That shows where this exhaust or whatever, I don't think it's exhaust, where that manifold piece is going to go on. So that is the tip that goes out to that's the opposite side of the crankcase. So this side is the crankcase side. So I put the little circular end cap for the crankcase, which is one of these little guys. This goes on there, plop it on, kind of use my fingers to make sure it's lined up and even, give it a little pressure. There it is. And then the top part is going to be the top of the cylinder. And you can see the big ugly seam. That's going to be towards the back. But you line up on this top plate, there's a little rectangle, a white rectangle. That's where another component of the engine, like part of the valves or something, is going to go. So you just make sure that little rectangle is in line with that seam on the cylinder. Then you've got it oriented in the correct direction. And so that's going to be a place where we're going to add this piece once we get done. Then it's just a matter of gluing all these cylinders individually to those little white circle areas, and making sure that the seam is in the back. And that makes that little top cap white rectangle go in the right orientation. And I look, every time I put one on, I look at it from the front, but also from the side, and make sure it's not, crooked. And all you do is crank this puppy. You just pick each one of these up, you stick them on, and again, not too much glue because they will slide, but you add them on, and you just keep doing each time, adding it, looking at it from both angles, making sure it's straight, making tiny, tiny slight adjustments, and there's two of them. And this is a 9-cylinder engine, so you just keep doing that. A little bit of glue, doesn't take much. Grab a finished cylinder, put it on seam side in the back, towards the back, and that will orient everything the way you need it. And you just keep rolling, just keep on doing that all the way around. And it's sheer excitement. But the reason I kept it in here is to show you, that it doesn't take that long. This is, I think, 8 times faster, supposedly, on the little iMovie. But it's not a hard thing to do. But you can see my fingers. I'm really just making sure things are in line. And then the last one I'll show you, since it's tight corners, not difficult to do, but I grab it with I try to put it in. It's like, that's not going to work. So I take my tweezers and grab it because it fits much easier. Keep my big grubby fingers in there. Do the same thing. Plop it on, make sure it's oriented correctly, and there you go. All your cylinders are on, and then the next part will be detailing it, putting in the push rods, putting on the top pieces, and it'll look pretty cool. And then we'll touch up with some paint. Looks nice. So there it is, the beginning of the engine, and it looks nice. When we put the other parts on, that's how it's going to fit. It'll start to look really detailed, and it'll look really nice under the cowling, assuming it fits under the cowling. So we'll see how it goes.